Hey everyone, George here and welcome back to the channel. So recently I've been getting a lot of messages asking me about how to keep discus fish from fighting when they're placed in a new tank. So in other words, when you're setting up a new tank, how do you keep discus fish from fighting and keep that pecking order at a minimum? And I'm going to tell you some traditional ways in which to do that, but I'm also going to give you some unorthodox ways that I have figured out how to do it that are much easier. So watch the full video and make sure that you watch it to the end here, because there's a lot of information here that'll really be helpful to you. So when we come back, we'll talk about this. Hang in there with me, and we'll be right back. So as I said in the intro, I've been getting a lot of messages from people that are very curious about how to minimize the amount of fighting that goes on when you're setting up a new discus tank and how to minimize that fighting. There's a lot of traditional ways in which people have done this in the past, and we're going to talk about those first. But before we get started here, remember to hit that give me a like on this one, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments down below, and also share the video with your friends. That's how this channel grows, and I really appreciate it. So also use that bell up at the top there as a reminder of any new videos that we might have coming out, and you'll be the first to be notified and one of the first ones to get the information on that video. So when we set up a new discus tank, one of the things that happens all the time with new discus fish in a tank is a pecking order. Now, some of this can be minimized by getting fish that are all the same age. We've talked about that in other videos before. That's something I do recommend to you. I also would tell you that if you're going to buy fish from different suppliers, that can also create problems, even if they are the same size fish, just simply because the environment in which they're raised in can be quite different, and putting these all together is very confusing to the fish and so forth. So find out a little bit about the fish from your supplier, the type of tank that they've been in. Have they been in a bare bottom tank? Have they been in a tank where, if they're in a grow out tank, likely it's a bare bottom tank, but if it's not, and they have been in a planted tank with substrate and that kind of thing, try to find out a little bit of information about that. And again, if you're buying from several suppliers, try to get information a little bit about both, and try to make the new setup tank that you have neutral in ways that prevent these fish from thinking the territory is theirs in a way that is unhealthy. So what happens typically in a new setup is the discus tank, of course, are going to vie for a pecking order regardless of the size of them. There's always certain fish that are a little bit more aggressive than others, just simply by their breeding instinct, I should say, as to the pecking order in the tank. And of course, there's overly aggressive discus sometimes, and then there's subservient discus in the tank, and the subservient discus, of course, are not going to fare very well. So let's talk about a couple of things that you can do to minimize the fighting in the tank. And the first one would be a very traditional way would be to have the fish in the tank for 2, 3, 4 days, kind of figure out who is in the top of that pecking order and who's at the bottom. And the ones in the middle are typically not going to have the most problems. It's typically the top fish in the tank and the lowest on that pecking order that are going to be going at each other. In other words, the top dog is going to be picking on those other fish. Now, a couple of different things is line of sight. You can move some things around in the tank after 3 or 4 days. If you have a very well-established planted tank and you're not able to do that, some of the things that you can do is add things to the tank that are temporary, and gradually, as these fish live with each other for a while, you can remove those things. Now, that's one way of doing it. That's probably the most traditional way that you can do this, and it is not always something that works, but it is something that I would say most of the time you can create an environment where that aggression goes down substantially. Now, a second way that's very traditional is to have a planted tank. In other words, a tank where fish can hide and get away from the more aggressive fish. This is something I would recommend in a larger tank. You should always have a minimum 75-gallon tank anyway. I see people trying to raise young discus in a 50-gallon tank and not having a lot of success with that. If you are raising discus in a 50-gallon tank, you're going to have to do a lot of work to keep that tank in good shape, and you're also going to have to do a lot of water changes to keep the water very clean in that tank. 50 gallons is a lot of room. If you are going to use a 50-gallon tank, I don't recommend putting a lot of stuff in the tank because there's not a lot of room in there to begin with. So I would make sure that maybe you do a bare bottom tank that just has a few ornamental stones in it and a piece of wood and that sort of thing, and maybe do without the plants in that kind of a tank. But I don't recommend a 50-gallon tank for people that are beginning in this because it's very, very difficult to keep a tank like that, number one, healthy, and also keep the aggression down, simply because there's not a lot of room for these fish and they can't get away from each other. So my recommendation is 75 to 120-gallon tank, and if you have a 75 to 120-gallon tank, put enough plants in there that are tall enough and that kind of thing so that the fish can have an area where they can go. The ones that are a little bit more subservient and not as aggressive, they can go and hide and work their way up through that pecking order. You want to get them eating. The big thing is if you're putting fish together in a new tank, a lot of times you're going to get fish that are so aggressive that they're going to keep the other ones from eating. One of the things that you can do is when you're feeding your fish is to feed in a couple of different parts of the tank to keep the fish separated so that everybody gets some food. And if your fish are not eating within a week or two, and it can happen, fish can take up to a couple of weeks to really start eating. I like to see a nice healthy tank where the fish are all eating within a day or two. I've seen fish take a couple of hours and they're all eating, and then I've seen tanks where some of the fish are eating in a couple hours and others it takes 2 weeks for them to start eating. And that's not always the healthiest situation, but 99% of the time they're going to work it all out. And those fish, if you do the right things, a couple of things you can do is turn up the temperature in the tank and that sort of thing to get their metabolism up, and those fish that are not eating get their metabolism going a little bit, and they'll be a little bit more assertive about eating regardless of the pecking order situation and things like that that may be sort of keeping them a little bit timid and not coming out to readily eat when food's available. But breaking up the line of sight and that kind of thing is very traditional way of keeping these fish from being too aggressive with each other. Once you do that, you're kind of reestablishing everything in the tank. Territories don't become something that are permanent because you're moving things around. So you want to you want to sort of get your tank into a situation where you are not having such aggression going on that somebody's getting hurt, because a lot of times with discus fish, they will go at it pretty good. If they're going at it head to head, a lot of times this is a good thing to have happen because that pecking order is getting established. But if you see fish backing down and being chased off, a lot of times this is going to prevent them from eating, and they will literally starve themselves to death just to stay away from that aggression. And in that kind of a situation, you probably are going to have to move fish around and get them out of the tank and put some other fish in that are not as easily intimidated by the more aggressive fish. But I have got some new ideas that I have been using, or techniques I should say, that I have been using over the last couple of years that I find is very, very effective. Now, one of the things, and I'm going to show a picture of this in the video here, so you'll see that pop up in a second here, but that is taking the nozzles, especially if you have an all-in-one tank, and redirecting the water flow into a different area of the tank. This will sometimes confuse the more aggressive fish into believing that the environment has changed enough to where it sort of throws them off a little bit. And this is a real easy way, instead of moving a bunch of stuff around in your tank, to get your fish to feel currents coming from different directions and flow coming from different directions from your nozzles that are feeding the tank the fresh water coming in through the filters. And this can often be as simple as that you would just change that around, and it totally changes the whole environment in the tank as far as how the aggression is going. Now, this sounds kind of silly probably to some of you who think, well, you know, why would that be? Well, the bottom line is this just simply an easy way to change things in the tank so that they feel different to the fish, and it takes their mind off the aggression that's going on. It really does work. People think I'm kind of crazy until they try it, but I have done this several times over the last few years. It was an idea that a friend of mine had that grows thousands of discus a year, and he recommended this to me, and I tried it a couple of times, and it worked really, really well. I was just really surprised. I was going through on my first tank that I had this technique used. I had tried everything, moving rocks around, moving pieces of wood around, planting more plants and that kind of thing, and I wasn't getting the results that I wanted as far as creating an environment where that aggression would get down. But I simply started to move the nozzles. This is on all-in-one tanks or canister filters where you have a nozzle feeding into it. If you just slightly move the flow on it, it can really, really create a completely different current system in the tank and give the fish, throw them off a little bit and take that aggression down. Once fish get familiar with each other, a lot of times that pecking order will go away, at least enough to where the fish that are very timid get an opportunity to establish themselves a spot in the tank that is safe and they're not being chased around. So as crazy as it sounds, this can be a very effective technique in getting your fish to stop fighting and to calm the tank down just enough to where typically in most tanks, discus fish, after a week or two, there's a pecking order. You just don't want to go through that kind of pecking order where there's so much aggression that fish are so timid that they're afraid to eat and that kind of thing. And as I said, you can also use the other technique of feeding in a couple of different spots in the tank, and this will help also where if the tank's big enough, say on a 75 or a 120, and you've got 5 to 7 small 2.5 or 3-inch discus in there, that the more aggressive fish can't cover the whole tank as far as chasing the more timid fish off and keeping them away from the food, because it's really just a show of aggression when you're putting food in there. The top fish are going to eat first, and then everybody else is going to eat afterwards. That's just normal in any discus tank until it gets established. Once it's really well established, you'll notice that there's still going to be that top dog in the tank that's kind of going to, go and test everybody during a feeding period, or just during the day when the lights are on. You'll see those fish act more aggressively towards the more timid fish, just to test them and kind of put them in their place. That's very normal behavior. It's when you get to the point where there's so much aggression going on that you're seeing fins that are getting shredded, and pieces of the dorsal fin are missing, or tail fin are missing, and that kind of thing. That's when you kind of got to step in and say, this kind of aggression is a little bit more than just normal aggression, and you got to do something a little bit more aggressive in order to shut that down. And again, moving things around, like I said, is a very traditional way to do that. But try moving the flow around in the tank, pointing your flow to a different direction in the tank, and that will often really distract the fish and give them time. Once they're, like I said, once they have been in the tank with each other for a period of time, all the fish become accepted with each other. There's still a pecking order, but there's not an aggression that's going on so badly that the more timid fish don't get a chance to eat, or being chased around the tank all the time. This can cause fish to really shut down, to be so afraid to come out. Sometimes they'll hide in a particular part of the tank, and then they'll end up just sort of wasting away because they don't eat. And once they get to a certain point where you see that pinched in area on their forehead, if that gets to be too bad, it's almost impossible to bring them back, and they will eventually die. So you don't want that kind of a situation. Well, I hope this video was informative in a way that those of you who are starting new discus tanks, I know a lot of people are sending me information about new discus tanks that they're setting up, and they're having a little problem with aggression. And I've told people one-on-one about these different techniques that I have used to create an environment in the tank where everybody's sort of being able to live with each other. But I wanted to kind of tell everybody these different techniques so that you don't have to contact me about this kind of thing. Right here is enough information to get you going. But as I said, if you're seeing any kind of damage to your discus from the more aggressive discus in the tank, sometimes it's better to just move them. I know that's not always an option for people because they only have one tank, but sometimes removing the more aggressive fish out of the tank allows the less aggressive fish, the more timid fish, to establish themselves in a very non-aggressive way, in a very normal way, to get a pecking order going, and then reintroducing the aggressive discus back into the tank. Typically it's only 1 or 2 fish that do this. Sometimes it is 2, but normally just 1 fish that's doing this and creating the very tense environment for the rest of the discus that you're trying to establish in the tank, and taking that more aggressive fish out and putting them in a let's say not a hospital tank necessarily, but maybe a quarantine tank. It can be as small as a 20-gallon, as long as you're keeping the water clean and that kind of thing. You've got a couple of fish that are being aggressive. You can put up to 2 fish into a 20-gallon. We use 20 gallons to breed fish all the time. So discus that small are going to do just fine in a 20-gallon until your less aggressive fish and more timid fish get established in that bigger tank. Then you can take your fish out of that 20-gallon and reintroduce them into the larger tank. And often once that aggression has been put aside and they're sort of used to all the water parameters and everything, adding them back in, add them in the evening, don't add them during the day. This is also a good way to reintroduce the fish because they don't have an opportunity to be aggressive. They have a whole night of being in the tank and adapting themselves to the water parameters. Your water parameters for the most part should be the same in all of your tanks. If you're using water, you're not using RO water or something like that, if it's coming right out of your tap, all of your tanks are going to be pretty much the same. The slight differences because of the type of rock maybe that you're using or substrate. If you're using a bare bottom tank, which is what I recommend, or a tank with a small amount of sand in it, you're going to have less and less of these kinds of problems. So add them back in the evening, and typically you're going to find that those aggressive fish, after a week or two, when they're reintroduced to the tank, they're going to do just fine. So thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. As I said, give me a like on this one. And also, if you have not subscribed to the channel, today's a great day to do that. I appreciate it so much. Leave your comments down below if you have more questions about this subject, or if you have something totally new that you want to know about. I'll be glad to get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. And of course, share this video with your friends. Thank you so much for joining me today. We will see you on the next one. Until then, we're out of here.